When you hear about the early days of the PlayStation 1, the games spoken of most often tend to be the stunning releases that dominated the console's preview period and launch, the Tekkens and Ridge Racers and Wipeouts of the era. Undeniable in their importance that they were to the PlayStation's early success, there's one game for myself that was the real hook of the console. A game that didn't have the same clean presentation as Wipeout or the arcade quality wonders of Tekken and Ridge Racer. What it did have was the pure raw heavy metal attitude that I was really looking for in my teenage years. And that game was Twisted Metal. And while I only saw the original game in the pages of magazines, its sequel was the game that dominated my time with the PlayStation 1 for the whole console cycle and beyond. In today's Mellow Gaming Recommends, I'm looking at Twisted Metal World Tour, a game which may be one of my all-time favourites for Sony's first console. It's a game I'd play religiously with my Mellow Gaming buddy Paul and my co-host on Reacting Sentai Yoppa Ranger, Kevin. It was the game we'd play every chance we'd get, a game I liked so much I actually purchased it before I got my PlayStation. Twisted Metal World Tour, known as Twisted Metal 2 in the US and Twisted Metal EX in Japan, was released in the UK in February of 1997. If memory serves me correctly, Paul got this game around its release and we'd play it at the weekends or after school. A few months later, my mum told me I could have a PlayStation 1 for my 15th birthday. She allowed me to pick out what bundle I wanted from a mail order catalogue she used, and so it would arrive in time. Waiting for that console to arrive was agonising for my 14-year-old brain. At some point in the lead up, I traded in a load of Mega Drive games. This is probably what happened to my childhood copy of Cheeky Cheeky Boys I mentioned in my video on that gem of a game. I combined my trade-in value, which wasn't as stingy as it is today, with some pocket money I had and purchased Twisted Metal World Tour so I'd have it ready for when the console arrived. I played that copy a few times at a friend's house, perfecting my skills for when my own console would arrive, which wasn't much later to be fair. Whilst I did get a bunch of the big name early PS1 titles with my birthday present, Twisted Metal World Tour was the mainstay of the collection. I should probably talk about the game itself. Twisted Metal is a series of games about cars shooting each other to pieces in huge deathmatch arenas. In 1997, first-person shooter multiplayer was only a few years into going mainstream, or as mainstream as games got then. GoldenEye hadn't even come out yet, not in early 1997 anyway. Twisted Metal shares a lot in common with the FPS deathmatch formula. It's all about a bunch of combatants loaded up with weapons fighting to the death in a series of unique arenas. But in taking the deathmatch formula and slamming cars into it, developers SingleTrack created a new genre that had come to be known as car combat. A genre that maybe burned brightly for a few years before fizzling out, only to briefly reappear from time to time in the following generations. I love the genre's mix of driving and smashing things. It took the battle mode of Mario Kart and made it raw and violent, set it in a dystopia of ruined landscapes that were often a few missiles away from collapse. For sure, Mario Kart had been the mainstay of multiplayer gaming sessions in the previous gen, and so moving to this darker and more action-packed take on the battle mode in my teen years made a lot of sense in hindsight. Let's face it, teenagers still love the stuff they liked a few years before. They just want blood and explosions in it, because that's cooler than cartoony characters firing turtle shells at each other. The edge was real. In World Tour you have a choice of 12 varied vehicles plus 2 extras via cheat codes. Each character is competing to win a wish to be granted by the Twisted Metal tournament's organiser Calypso. Naturally, the wishes are tainted. Spoilers. Whilst I did spend an age finishing the game with every character back in the day, that wasn't entirely the main draw, although the end sequences are pretty great. Playing the game in single player is a hell of a lot of fun, even without aiming to see the endings though. The AI is just at the right intersection between being a threat and being dumb as bricks. They'll come for you for sure, but they'll also go careening into walls and smashing into objects. I'm pretty sure it's on purpose too. As the name the game has in the UK implies, this Twisted Metal tournament is going on a world tour. Their stage is based on Los Angeles, New York, Moscow, Holland and a number of other places. I think the most famous of all the stages is Paris. Many stages feature some aspect of its environment that is destructible. On Paris, it's the Eiffel Tower. This was one of the biggest wow moments I'd ever seen in a game at a time. No round in Paris would go more than a minute before someone teleported their way into the tower, placed a remote bomb and detonated it. The tower would explode into multiple pieces and tip over onto nearby rooftops, providing a literal new layer to the combat. Other stages feature destructible Hollywood signs, windmills, and you can even blow the robes off the Statue of Liberty. If you're some kind of sick pervert, that is. Arguably, the stage with the most destruction is Antarctica. As you battle here, the various icebergs that compromise the stage will crumble away, gradually reducing the play area as the battle rages on. It's a stage that's equal parts genius and frustrating, as it can really rip through your lives if you're not careful. Thankfully, there is a password system you can use to get back into the action where you left off. No memory card functions though, which was the fashion at the time, much like onions tied to your belt. Although the destruction is a huge draw for the game, I've always found it was the handling and the second-to-second action that hooked me. The way projectiles can careen past you, how you can spin around on a dime and get launched through the air by the weightier vehicles. It's all part of the chaotic symphony that is Twisted Metal. There's a feeling that you're always on the verge of going fully out of control before you pull it back in. Moments where you'll launch right into combat and blow an enemy up before driving right through the resultant explosion is the sort of stuff that always feels awesome. Sure, it sucks to get flung around by Twister's special tornado attack, but you'll be back on the wheels and getting your revenge in a few moments. Multiplayer is, as you'd expect, a jolly good time. Can be played cooperatively or competitively, and I've got to say that it's one of the rare games where I don't actually have a preference for either approach. Normally in multiplayer games I like to go cooperative, if the choice is there, dependent on the game of course. But with Twisted Metal I am just as happy to blow up cars working with a buddy or against them. Another thing I find with this game is I don't tend to go for my usual type of character. I tend to like playing as the bulky damage absorbing types, tanking in an MMO, playing as the big bruiser in fighting games, that sort of thing. Here I go for the faster, more fragile cars. Not for the challenge of survival, but because I find the faster cars have the manoeuvrability to avoid attacks a lot more, and also have some of the coolest special attacks. Outlaw, Spectre and Thumper are probably my mains. There are lighter characters in the form of Twister, Grasshopper and Mr. Grimm, but they're a little too fragile for my liking. Obviously the best way to play the game is to ignore everything I just said about speed and manoeuvrability and put in a cheat code to play as Minion. This guy is one of the bosses you'll encounter during the game and is a proper double hard bastard. His special fires 3 powerful homing missiles along with a freeze blast, and he's so heavy you can basically ram some opponents to death with him. If you feel like that's too easy for you but you really like Minion's specials, you can actually fire that off with a code that you input anytime while playing. The game is loaded with hidden codes for extra attacks and skills, such as firing off freeze blasts, napalm and launching attacks backwards. There's even extra multiplayer stages, 2 from the original Twisted Metal and 1 from Singletrack's hoverbike racing game Jet Moto. Twisted Metal World Tour is pure action in video game form. During any round you're never more than a few seconds away from some crazy nonsense kicking off. To me, it's a bit of a shame the series and the genre didn't really go for much longer. I feel like there's plenty of room in the gaming world today for some big online car combat game to be a mainstay of the multiplayer scene. We already have loads of combat based games and Rocket League exists. Just PPAP them together and you'd have a hit. Or another unsuccessful car combat game to add to the pile. Seriously though, there's very few games I think have matched up to Twisted Metal World Tour, and almost all of them were made with the involvement of the game's development team. All the direct PS1 sequels developed by 989 Studios never came to the UK. I played Twisted Metal 3 and 4 and disliked both though. Road Trip Vacation 2012 was developed by Singletrack after parting ways with the Twisted Metal franchise. It's a damn fine and slightly wacky game, plus it has the Mighty Mighty Boss tones on the soundtrack, which is always good. On the PS2 the series' original director David Jaffe returned for Twisted Metal Black, which is a fantastic game in its own right. Larger levels and that same car combat feel, albeit a bit weightier. Your car won't be getting flung about on impacts as it did in World Tour. It's a damn good game that was significantly cut down when released here in the UK. We lost all the cutscenes and a few other elements got chopped along the way. I've always liked how this game played more than how it looked, or the whole dark horror vibe it was going for. Similarly, Twisted Metal on PlayStation 3 plays fantastically and has some huge stages that can be resized for different amounts of players. It had online play too, but those servers have been shut down. Like with Twisted Metal Black, I never quite liked the tone of this version. They're both great games on their own terms though. I think World Tour really nailed the tone I was after. The look again was brighter but still full of destruction and decay. You could spot enemies easier, rockets left bright orange and purple trails behind them, and there was a sort of heavy metal comic book aesthetic to it that I always felt was just right for this type of game. It's dark and full of horror elements, but the lights are on and you're racing about at 100 miles per hour because you've got explosions to do. Twisted Metal World Tour is a game that fits in with 90s me perfectly. I know plenty of people in my age range that were super into it too. It's one of those games I can easily pop in and play anytime, much like Doom or Mario Kart, probably because it exists at a nexus point between them, with a little bit of Street Fighter button combo and character stats based salt sprinkled on top. Twisted Metal World Tour is worthy of being spoken of as one of the defining PlayStation 1 games, and as the most mid to late 90s action game there ever was. Thank you very much for watching this video where I gush about a 24-year-old game the kids today don't care about. A special shout out goes to my Patreon backers who have given me way more support than I could imagine. If you'd like to catch these Mellow Gaming Recommends episodes early, along with a few other perks, do check out the link on the end slate. Again, thanks for watching, do a like and subscribe, and maybe tell me what games from your teen years you feel define that era for you. I'll catch you all next time.